Okie doke. So we're going to start about now, I think, as it's now 8 o'clock on the dot, maybe a few minutes after. But anyone joining, I just want to ask, if possible, for everyone to put themselves on mute for the duration of the presentation. And you can type out your questions whenever you like, and I would love to answer them all at the end. We're going to get onto the question section, and hopefully everyone can unmute themselves and allow for a bit more of an organic discussion. Please don't be shy, but equally if you want to write out your questions, that's also great too. To introduce this webinar is the second of a series we've had, which is launching Feedback's Toolkits, and they're designed to make organising celebratory food waste feasts much easier, and in doing so we want to expand the global food waste movement. The project to make these kits has been going on for around 9 months, and it's possible thanks to the support of the Rockefeller Foundation. So a huge thanks to them. To say a bit more about ourselves as an organisation, excuse the pause. I just want to. Okie doke. So, speaking a bit more about ourselves as an organisation, apologies for the pause. Feedback is an organisation that focuses on campaigning on global food waste. We campaign to end food waste at every level of the food system, and we catalyse action on eliminating food waste globally, working with governments, international institutions, businesses, NGOs, grassroots organisations and the public to change society's attitudes towards wasting food. To introduce myself, after a few minutes of speaking, my name is Pascal and I've been Feedback's events and campaigns coordinator for 2 years, doing larger Feeding 5000s and community scale events across the world. And I've just got back from Feeding 5000 LA and Berlin, where we organised events over there. I'm going to introduce my colleagues who are also hopefully here. Dominica, would you like to start?
Sure, thanks Pascal. I'm Dominica. I am Feedback's Head of Programs and Campaigns and have been with Feedback before it was Feedback for over 4 years now, working on all of our campaigns, but most specifically on Feeding 5000, which is, as Pascal mentioned, our sort of flagship celebratory movement building event that catalyses the global food waste movement. And I will in turn introduce Christina, who is our fantastic communications coordinator.
Hi, I'm Christina. I've been with Feedback for 6 months now, so I just did my first Feeding the 5000, which was LA. I also helped organise a smaller Feeding the 500 at my university at home in Ireland. And yeah, it was a really fun learning experience Feeding 5000 LA, so looking forward to talking about it with everyone.
Fantastic. So we've got lots to get through in this webinar. We want to talk about the story of the Feeding 5000 and why we think it's such a successful model and why it's achieved so much. In particular, why partnerships and coalition building is so crucial, and top tips and lessons that we've learned along the way. One of those is about finding volunteers, and I hope that we also have our colleague Kira, who has been our volunteer coordinator for Feeding 5000 LA and Denver. Kira, I don't know if you're there and ready, or if we could dial you in a bit later. Maybe some technical issues there. So in that case then, I think it would be really good to get on to what is a Feeding 5000. For anyone that doesn't know, it is basically, but rather miraculously, exactly what it says on the tin. At each event, we serve up a delicious communal feast for 5,000 people, made from food that would have otherwise gone to waste. And this basically all started in 2009 when Tristram Stewart, who both founded the organisation and is still very much a part of it today, wrote a fantastic book on the global food waste scandal. And he wanted to reach out to lots of people as he felt that the book potentially wasn't enough. He wanted to reach millions. So many people came together and organised Feeding 5,000 London. There are some photos that you can see right now. And the short story is that it was a huge success, and there have been over 44 all over the world. So the Feeding 5,000s have taken place in Australia, Belgium, France, UK and Norway, and of course the US of A. So I think today I'd really like us to talk about one of the events that's had a really big impact, which is Brussels. And Domi, I think you're definitely well placed to tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brussels was an event that took place all the way back in 2014, and it was an important one in terms of mobilising not just the local and national movement against food waste, but also the broader European one as well. It really brought together both local organisations, national organisations, regional ones, because of the unique structure of the Belgian government, and of the sort of local the local variations actually involving the local governments was almost more important than involving the national government at that stage. And we organised both for Feeding the 5,000 right in the heart of Brussels, but also a lot of ancillary events that meant that we also engaged the European institutions. So we actually served up a food waste lunch in the European Parliament cafeteria and organised a conference on food waste together with the European institutions. And that mix of grassroots action and expertise and engagement of decision makers really captured the Belgian media and the international media's imagination. And the resulting media coverage was really sensational. And in addition to the media coverage, we also kickstarted a whole sort of social entrepreneurship movement, and which really sort of took food waste as this potential, like this beautiful untapped resource, and out of that came the Food Surplus Entrepreneurs Network, and a whole sort of beautiful ripple effect. And I think the reason I'm able to talk about all this impact now is that quite a lot of time has passed. And one thing to bear in mind is that Feeding the 5,000s really create networks, like living, breathing networks of a whole host of different types of organizations and institutions. And the impact of those connections is often most felt 6 months, a year, or a few years down the line. So I'm sure after LA we'll be able to tell you the true impact, not immediately, but a little bit later on. So that's a little bit about Belgium, but I think now is probably a good opportunity to jump into the US, because as a result of both Feeding 5,000 Brussels and many other European Feeding the 5,000 events, we really were lucky enough to bring the model of Feeding the 5,000 and that movement building to the US, thanks to the Rockefeller Foundation, who through their YieldWise initiative had a new interest in food waste and a new program on food waste, most of which is focused on the global south and on reducing food loss, but also they recognized that to address food waste at its core, they needed to engage with American consumers and businesses. And so aiming to sort of replicate the model of success in Europe as a core part of their strategy, and so they supported a year of Feeding the 5,000 in the US that took us from New York to DC, to Denver, to LA, to Maine in Portland, and to the Hudson Valley as well. So that's where I think it would be really great to bring in Kira if she's joined us, maybe to talk a little bit about how Feeding the 5,000 Front Range and Denver sort of came together, and the impact that the event had a year, no, not quite a year, 6 months down the line, what's happened?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Domi. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, I will actually say it's 7 months because it was the 7 month anniversary just recently, and we had Uproot Colorado's first official gleaning event of the season. So Uproot Colorado is a venture that I have been working on that came about basically when the core organizing team of Feeding the 5,000 Denver wanted to build on the momentum the really amazing momentum that came out of that event. So we've been working on that for the past 7 months. But Feeding the 5,000 Denver, or Front Range, began with Dave Laskarczewski, a keen volunteer who decided he wanted to raise awareness about food waste and the amazing things that are being done in Colorado. We're lucky to live in a state that really has a lot going on regarding food, and so together with the feedback team, he brought together a really incredible coalition of organizations, and I think that was pretty key to making Denver work so well, was having this diverse and dedicated group of organizations that pulled together to organize the various parts of the event. And we, in the lead up to the event, had 2 gleaning events, and I think you can see the photos of these there. 2 gleaning events where we harvested over 1,500 pounds of produce that went into the meal. Our disco chop party was held at Johnson & Wales Culinary Kitchen, which was terrific because we were able to work with the students there, and the facilities there were just incredible. So that was all set up there, and then we held the feast in downtown Denver and had a really incredible turnout with a lot of great speakers from farms, from food recovery organizations, from slow food, sort of all over the place. So a lot of energy to pull together a really great event.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much Kira for updating us on that. And for anyone that wants to find out a bit more about Uproot Colorado, there is a beautiful website which we can share with the slides as well, and you can find very easily online as well. And if I'm right, all extra help is appreciated to build the momentum on this amazing gleaning network as well.
Absolutely.
So if Domi is still on the line, I think it'd be really helpful. We've talked about Feeding 5,000 story and the really specific impacts that it has had in building the food waste movement, but I think it would be really great to talk about how much more there is to do and why we still think that Feeding 5,000s are really valuable. Dominica, I don't know if you're with us at the moment. There might be some technical difficulties, but I think if I can jump in for Dominica, I'm going to say that while Feeding 5,000s have been held in many areas across the world, it still is very much a grassroots movement which has local and national impact. And just as Brussels sparked a local movement, it also sparked a national spreading of interest for food waste, and that led to events in Ghent, in Antwerp, and led to some of the legislation that Dominica talked about. So now I want to talk about the toolkits and how to use them. We obviously think that you should have a look at them in detail, but we understand that organizing big events like this is a hard thing to do, and so we really wanted to make this as easy as possible. The kits are divided up by work stream, so that different groups can take charge of different activities, and we think this is a really good way of essentially dividing and conquering. So the toolkits go into where to start. We think that building a coalition, putting together a budget, and organising a venue is a great way to start. And what we want to go on to in this webinar also are the top tips and challenges and the things which are definitely apparent as you go through the process as well. So to start, I wanted to talk about partnerships. Partnering and building a coalition for a Feeding 5,000 is a great way to build relationships in the long run. It helps you source the resources that you need to have the event, and it also makes the event more impactful in the long run. As we've heard, some amazing ideas and initiatives come out of working together. So who to involve? I would definitely say that you want a diverse range of groups involved. This includes campaigning organisations, food organisations, redistribution charities, community catering operations, local government bodies, educational institutions, and faith groups. Anyone interested within a reason, we think you should get involved. One thing I would like to note, and I think is a very interesting part of Feeding 5,000 and gives it its spirit, is that we try to make the events apolitical wherever that's possible, and we don't allow corporate sponsorship, partnership, or visibility. This is mainly to maintain independence. There's a lot more information about this in the toolkit. However, we really want to emphasize that this in no way means that private companies cannot engage and be really involved in multiple ways and make a great contribution both to the event and to championing the cause as well. So if anyone would like to find out a bit more about this, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation. But as we say, there's lots of helpful documents in the toolkit as well. I think that another top tip I would personally say in my years organising these events is that MOUs are really helpful. Memorandums of understanding allow you to really clearly just get it down on paper what each partner is going to offer, and it prevents any confusion later down the line as well. So those would be my top tips. I think at this point we felt that it would be really good to talk about some of the challenges that you might face when you're reaching out to partners, maybe as a smaller organisation, or maybe when you're reaching out to organisations that don't have many resources themselves, and you're essentially asking them to commit their staff time. And in the non-profit sector, obviously that's a big thing to ask. Dominica, do we have you on the line to offer some thoughts on this? It seems we've lost her again. So hopefully Dominica can join a bit later and add her thoughts on that as well. But I think that what we've done in the past is develop really good proposals which clearly outline what we want to do, what impact we think it will have, and then what I would suggest is going and having those meetings in person and speaking. What do people feel that they could get out of the event, and what impact do they see it having? I think if everyone can contribute to both the messaging and how the event will go moving forward, then it is definitely more, everyone gets more invested, and it creates a bigger excitement in the long run too. So also on this note, very important for partnerships is venues. We want to tell all people thinking about organising a Feeding 5,000 to think big and be ambitious. We generally aim for the most iconic locations in a city, the ones with high footfall and ones that are really open as well, so that you can pull people off the street and have a really diverse audience as well. We obviously think it's important to build relationships with local municipalities wherever possible as well, because on top of being fantastic partners and it being part of their priorities to reduce food waste, it is really helpful in terms of overcoming some of the barriers to accessing and using really big venues for your event too. For previous events in Paris, we've been on Place de la République. In New York City, we were on Union Square, and it really is, it's great for photos as well, and it makes a big media storm to have a huge food waste feast on these great public squares. So I think something that is hugely important when you're having the initial discussions is budgets. That's one of the first questions we often get asked, is how much will an event like this cost? And one of our favorite anecdotes is that we've had Feeding 5000s that have been the cost of the petrol. We've also had events which are very expensive due to other permits and other unexpected costs as well. So what we would recommend as a really good initial step is to use one of Feedback's budget frameworks and outline what you think you can offer, what you think you can source, and what you might need extra assistance on. And this is really helpful for allowing you to predict how much your event will cost as well. And as always, please feel free to message, and we'd be happy to share those resources with you. Obviously, equipment is never a very exciting or sexy part of organizing events, but it's hugely important, and this is probably where it's hardest to avoid the spending. So this is one area where I think it's really helpful to be very realistic on what you think you can source for free and what you think you might need to buy. This is where it really, again, is important to build relationships. You can find sponsored trucks, free venues, kind chefs, and volunteers, but it takes time to build those relationships. So bear in mind all of those things as well when you're thinking about timelines for your event as well. We have been asked in the past whether it takes a few weeks to organize a Feeding 5000 or 6 months, and both are possible, but we would definitely advise the latter. My personal top tip is that when you're thinking about the disco chop and the preparatory chopping cooking event, always think about big, large plastic containers. These are really helpful for all aspects of your event too. I then wanted to chat about food sourcing, and this is where it gets really exciting. So you want to use your event to tell the story of food waste and how it occurs at every level of the supply chain, from farm to fork. This means that you want to research farmers, supermarkets, shops, warehouses, and maybe even think about gleaning. As has been mentioned on this call, we've done many gleaning events for Feeding 5000s in the past, and for anyone that doesn't know, that involves harvesting produce from farms that would otherwise not be utilized. And the gleaning allows you to get really great fresh produce and to investigate a bit further into farm level food waste as well. So I think, Kira, I wanted to ask you specifically, because obviously of your work with Uproot, for anyone that's not done an event before where they've needed to source food, would you advise anything in particular when approaching farmers?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing to keep in mind is that gleaning, I don't know how varied our audience is, but especially in the US at the moment, is gathering steam. It's taking off a bit, and so it is still a bit of a fringe movement, but it exists. So the first thing I would suggest is reaching out to see if there are any gleaning organizations or farmers that particularly promote gleaning, because that is obviously don't mind the pun, a low-hanging fruit. Then after that, you know, it's important to understand that there are a number of reasons that perfectly good food is left on farms. You want to be careful going on farms and talking about food waste, and you don't want to be blaming farmers for wasted food, but talking to them about the real concerns that exist in our society, whereby we don't value, you know, so-called ugly produce, can really allow you to form a connection with a farmer, and they might then be more willing to get behind the cause, get behind the event itself, and be interested in promoting these issues, in using their farm as a way to tell the story of how supermarkets will sometimes back out of contracts last minute. So I would definitely make sure that you're not just, you know, going onto the farm and saying we need food, but making sure you're trying to engage the farm with the issues that they face, because they're often not approached to tell their stories, and they are sometimes the most compelling stories. So this can be a really, as you can probably hear, it can be a time-consuming part, but a really, really valuable part of the event, I would say. And again, Uproot Colorado is, if you're wondering what gleaning is, that could be a good place to start, and feel free to reach out if you have more questions about reaching out to farmers.
Thanks so much for that, Kira. And we're going to speak a bit more very soon about the promotion and messaging. And that's a really good point, Kira, that you want to always bear in mind the stories and spread those voices as well further. So now I'd really like to talk about volunteers and how do you get 100 to 200 volunteers to get everything to happen. It's true that without the volunteers, these events wouldn't happen. And so I wanted to ask Kira, the floor is back with you. What are the biggest challenges that you have found with organising volunteers, and what tips would you offer to people who are looking to organise an event of this scale?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenges, I think, you know, one of the biggest challenges is doing it for the first time, is having trouble picturing the event before it happens, which is a really exciting challenge because it does end up pulling together. But it is kind of hard to imagine an event of this scale unless you've done something similar. I think the toolkit does say at the start, if you can get people together that have some experience either with putting on large events, or with a disco chop or some sort of large-scale food waste awareness event, that's ideal, because you can kind of see that end goal. I would say the same with your volunteer coordinator. Finding someone who has experience recruiting volunteers would be a really great place to start. Some other tips that I have made notes of are really this toolkit. There's a volunteer specific toolkit that is big and may seem overwhelming, but is just terrific. It's got some really specific tips and some really specific timelines. I would recommend that the volunteer coordinator goes over this toolkit with whoever is leading the event, just to make sure everyone's on the same page about that aspect, because really the event doesn't happen without volunteers. The more responsibility you're able to delegate to really dedicated volunteers, the better. And so I think it's really important to identify early on those volunteers that reach out and say, hey, I'm really excited about this event. It's easy when you're busy to just say, oh, great, that's two, and leave it at that. But see how that volunteer can contribute, what their strengths are, how they can help you out, because that will definitely help you in the long run. One particular thing I'll note is that when volunteers are signing up for the event, spending some time constructing that Google form or whatever platform you decide to use, but basically the form that asks volunteers their availability and their interests. that form, if that's well done, will really make it easy for you to divide people up into teams and identify team leaders. So it's worth putting the time into that form before you send it out. That's just something I would note. Again, the toolkit has a template there, and that's really useful to refer to. And then in terms of volunteer recruitment, this is of course very area specific and will really vary from area to area. But in general, we found for these events that first you want to look to your partner organizations, because the chances are that the organizations you're working with will have access to volunteer bases that are already interested in the sort of work we're doing, work around food and food waste and hunger relief. And are used to volunteering. So that's a really great place to start. Then Volunteer Match and Craigslist and other sites are a really useful platform to get volunteers. And then identifying groups. For Denver, we had a Colorado Young Leaders, which was an after-school, high school leadership group. And it was amazing to bring them in because that was exactly what they were about, leadership. And so they loved taking charge of things, and we could organize them as a group, give them a quick briefing, and then let them go take care of things themselves instead of organizing each individual person. So identifying keen and skilled groups is a really great way to bring people on. And then, of course, just telling volunteers to recruit other volunteers is a really great way to do it, because volunteering for this event is fun. And I think it's really where a lot of the post-event momentum and excitement comes from, because of the conversations volunteers have and what they learn talking to partner organizations. So it's an important role in more than just it pulls the event together. It's an important role for the bigger picture. And I think the one other tip that I had, Pascal, just in terms of what are some tips. I think, like you said, with budgets, you can be really thrifty. You can find people who have all sorts of crazy materials, but it takes time. And so the more organized you are, the more you're going to be able to draw on those existing resources. And I would say the same goes for volunteers. There are DJs out there that will DJ for free. There's, videographers, and you can bring in. We had a drone photographer for the Denver event, and that was all volunteer work. It just takes a bit of organization.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kira. Those were really fantastic points. And I think now that links really well with the recruitment and getting the word out there to promotion and messaging. And I would really love if Christina could take to the floor and speak a bit more about how we generally start this big process for a Feeding the 5,000.
Okay, I think my first top tip, which is kind of a good tip for life, would just be to get ready as early as you can. It takes, I think, a lot longer to get all the visual assets together and social media stuff. So I think trying to get that together as quick as you at the beginning, because you don't want to have to be doing that last minute. So deciding on what your message is going to be for social media, what your hashtags might be, creating something like a poster, and we have a poster creating kit if people need that. So yeah, I think trying to get that ready at least a month before the event is really, really useful. And then I think another really good tip is trying to reach different audiences. So if you're just using your own, say, Facebook account or Twitter account, you might just be reaching people who are, depending on what organization you are, who are already quite involved in the food waste movement. So for instance, for LA, we put a lot of listings on various kind of things like Time Out LA and LA Weekly, so that people, different people would see it. And then things like flyering and posters are another good way of, just getting, because people who aren't necessarily already involved in the food waste movement, because that's part of the kind of purpose of Feeding the 5,000. So it's reaching new people. And there's lots of creative ways to do that. So I think in LA there was people walking around in wonky veg costumes, giving out flyers. So it can be really fun as well, but just always thinking of like, are you reaching a new audience? For the more kind of traditional media, I think one really good thing is to like make the most of your partner organizations. So everyone will have different media contacts and different media lists. So once you get your media alert or press release together, like asking them to send it to people, because you're going to have more success with media contacts that people already have a relationship with. So I think just making the most of your partners there is really, really helpful. And also not to forget about local media, especially in certain like smaller places, because oftentimes they're like more likely to come, and maybe more people who live actually in that area are more likely to read it, and that will be really useful, and sometimes they get forgotten about. And then for social media, I think creating like a social media pack with like images and sample tweets that people can use is a really good way to encourage partners to do stuff, because if you can kind of spoon feed it to them, it just makes it easier for them to do it and stuff. So I think we did that for LA, and that was really useful. And also it's like everyone's messaging and branding is similar, so it looks like one core event.
So that's really helpful, Christina. Thank you so much. I think given that time is already a bit short, I'd really quickly like to take everyone through other aspects which you never want to overlook as well. Christina's given us some really helpful tips on utilizing different types of media, but of course general event preparation is still massively important. And so one important aspect of Feeding 5000 is that we try to make the events no waste wherever possible. Make sure to source biodegradable or recyclable crockery, and we recommend finding a venue that has organic food waste collection, or seeing whether you can source it for the venue itself as well. There's much more about this in both the Disco Chop Toolkit and the Event Management Toolkit, which goes into the details a lot more about some of these logistics as well. Following on from this, we really want to make sure that no food, of course, is wasted. So what we've done is offer produce to people at the event in grocery giveaways. We've offered it to service agencies and charities both before and after the event, but we would always advise have a plan a week before the event and only cook what you need. Speaking of grocery giveaways, I wanted to spend even just a few seconds talking about the additional activities. Some of the creative spirit of Feeding 5000 comes out on the venue halfway through the day after everyone's enjoyed their meal and they're thinking, what next? So we have chef demonstrations where people are cooking using produce that isn't the usual things that you see on the shelf. We have workshops, we've had quizzes. You can see on these photos that we had beautiful photo booths for people to put their heads through, and we've also had food waste wraps. There really is no end to the diverse, exciting opportunities of things you can include on the day as well. So if possible and that funding is available, make sure to get a stage and make the most of that. I wanted to wrap up, as I know that we're very quickly coming up to 7:40, and just let everyone know again that these toolkits are available for anyone, and we really want to spread them far and wide. They go into the specifics of everything that we've talked about on this call, and I hope that we've offered some top tips and gone over some of the challenges, but that we've piqued your interest and made you want to read these a bit more and find out about how you could organise your own event too. As well, if you would like to find out a bit more about how it could work for you locally, we'd really recommend getting in contact and arranging a one-to-one session too. But for now, I just wanted to say thank you so much for attending this podcast, webinar, excuse me, and I wanted to say another thank you to the Rockefeller Foundation for helping us to put these toolkits together and helping us spread the food waste movement further. As always, please feel free to email over any questions that you have afterwards, and thank you again